Hi and welcome to this Elkhorn coral time lapse. Now when we're in Zbrush we're going to always want to start with a new document and to hide the light box so that we've not got anything there. Now today we're going to utilize a subtool called Zsphere. Now what this allows us to do is to draw out a red looking sphere and sort of extrude or drag other spheres out of them. So that we can make shapes that extend, sort of like arms or branches. But with any, we're going to want to make sure that we rename the object so we know what it is when it comes down to multiple objects being in the scene later on. Now, when we have done that, if we have draw on, we can make new spheres come out of the pre-existing sphere like this. With that we then can move them so that we can sort of change their position, etc. If we press A on our keyboard we can actually see what that looks like in terms of a mesh when it's completed, or if we were to change it at that stage. Now we can move these around, we can scale them, and also we can rotate them. Now it won't make much difference at the moment, but it's still enabled to. But in order to draw more we need to make sure that have draw as well as edit on. Now you'll be able to see how in which the other functions work a little bit better now, so that we can scale them individually, or we can scale them collectively if we do it in the middle, as we can see there, and we can add others in the middle as well if we want to, just by clicking in the middle. If we don't want it, hold Alt and click again and we can get rid of it. So I'm going to spend some time just getting a basic shape of what I want based off the references that I've found. I'm going to make some roots and sort of make some of the petal-like formation of the Elkhorn coral, and I'm just going to speed that up in a second, just really doing exactly the same as what I've just showed you there, moving things around, making new spheres and manipulating them. Once I'm happy with it, I press A and I see the result, as you can see on screen. So when we're finished with this, press A and make it a polymesh 3D, and it will turn it into an actual object we can start to sculpt and manipulate. Now I prefer to use clay build-up. That's BCB I think on the hotkeys, and what we want to do is to start to build up the shape with a big brush at low active points. Now the reason for this is then we get to affect the silhouette shape rather than adding too much finite detail before we have the overall shape sorted first. Now with the shape of this, I'm going to try and build the sort of petal-like formation that the Elkhorn and sort of coral does. So we're going to spend some time just trying to change the shape of the tops of these. They're no longer as spherical as they once were, and just sort of really make them seem a little bit more like the references in which I've gathered. Now when you come around to sculpting certain parts, you'll see like this that you may start to stretch the actual polys in which the sculpture's made up of, and this is when it's a good time to sort of check with polyfill how much it is stretching, because we need these polys to be as equally distributed as possible to get as most out of the sculpt as we can whilst it's at low resolution. Now it does help as well at high resolution, but we certainly need it distributed well if we want to affect the silhouette. So what we're going to do, so I'm just going to briefly rename this because it's still the same name as what it was prior. So now we know that it's something that can be edited. With that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on Dynamesh, which is in geometry tools. Now with this, it's best to keep the resolution quite low to begin with if you're working on a silhouette. If you do need to boost that up, you can play around with the strength of it in terms of the resolution, or you can start to add in division or subdivision above. You can see the SMT is selected. Turn that off. That just means smooth. We don't want any of the edges to smooth whilst we're doing it. Now at any point with Dynamesh on, if we hold control and drag select outside of the object, then it will re-Dynamesh and recalculate and redistribute the polygons. If we stretch out any of that too much, we can use BIN, which is inflate, just to make that sort of no longer too thin. Now some tools that I like to use in this are Move Topological, which is BMT, which you can see me using there to drag some bits out. Now this also sometimes, when Dynameshing, gives us some issues with sort of thickness. As I mentioned, that inflate tool then allows us to give it some more added thickness, so that we don't any longer have any issues in terms of holes or maybe sort of bits that look as if they're broken. Now there are other tools in which we can use as well to make sort of shapes, such as the trim tools. So I'm just moving out this at the moment, and if I show you my favourite, which is the trim lasso, it says if we hold control and shift, it uses it. Now when we hold control and shift, we need to do an anti-clockwise swoop, but we need to finish it. If we don't finish that whole section, it may clip off somewhere else in the scene. Now sometimes this doesn't do a great job. As you can see, it's quite blocky. Now if we need to get a more crisp finish to this this trim, we will need to either subdivide or change the resolution of the actual model that we have in there on the right hand side. Now it's worth just sort of flicking round and sort of changing the settings to fit the purpose. If it's not crisp enough, then you'll need to do further editing or changing the subdivision so that the active points go up, or change Dynamesh resolution so you can see it working. It's magic. Once you're happy with the results, just start sculpting again and sort of go from there. If you do get some anomalies in it from any of the tools in which you use, just remember that inflate is probably your best friend in order to give it thickness and remove any of the issues that you might have. Now this stage, if we hold control and select, and also we have mask functions as well, so we just masked an area. I quite like using mask pen. If we hold control, then we get to see that we get a bit more control of it as well. So just going to mask the part that I need, because what we're going to do in a moment is we're going to split that away from the rest of the subtool, and we're going to duplicate it in order to make copies of it, and also we'll be able to manipulate it by scaling the full thing using the move, the scale and the rotate tools, as we can sort of see in a second. Now if I hold control and I, it will invert the selection, so I'm only selecting the area in which I've masked. Currently the rest of the other is the one that's unmasked. So what I'm going to try and do, as sort of see here, is start to build that sort of petal-like formation that the coral has, and that's hopefully going to be done through me duplicating, rotating and making more of these. So if I hold control and I to flip that masked selection, as you can see there, it will change colour. From there, what we're going to do is go into subtool, we're going to go to split, and then split the masked points from it, or the other. It really doesn't matter which one. but it then splits them into two separate subtools. Now I'm then free to sort of drag and manipulate the sort of new subtool and press duplicate on the right hand side in the tools as well, and we can make more copies of that same one. And what I'm doing there is just maneuvering around copies of it just to make the object seem a little bit more unique. Now when we're done with this, we can actually move the formation of them down if we need to, but also what we can do is we can merge them down back into one solid object. It's undoable, so please make sure that you're ready to do this if that's the stage in which you're pressing these buttons, because it will try and fuse them all together. Now if we control and drag select, it will try and re-dynamesh everything together, and sometimes we get given some of these weird shapes. As we mentioned earlier on, if you use inflate, it will help us as much as possible to fill that gap. Then get your sculpting tools back out, re-dynamesh, and it should get rid of anything that looks nasty like that, so that you're then free to start editing away again. Okay, so now I'm just going to carry on sculpting, try and make some of the unique detail that I'm hoping for, observing the references that I have on my other screen, and sort of trying to create something that looks as much like the reference as I can. Okay, so I'm now just going to skip forward, just because none of it is really sort of changing any of the methods here, just spending some time sculpting, maneuvering, dynameshing until I get the final result that I'm happy with. Now, I strongly suggest saving quite often. It's a notorious program for crashing. Certainly, it is for myself. Make sure you save the file as the project, so that you can return to this as much as you want. Now, at this stage, it's when we're going to start to add in the topology. So we're going to insert another Z-sphere. And what we're going to do is try and place that Z-sphere inside of the existing subtool that we've sculpted. Now the reason for this is that we're going to actually draw onto the surface of the original object. Topology. This process, retopology, allows us to use the original shape as a reference in order to make the new version from that visual. So we need to try and place it inside of that object so that it's hidden. Now, if we go into Topology and press Edit Topology, then turn on Draw, we will be able to start to paint on some of the faces. Now, we actually work within sort of active points, or if you were in a different piece of software like vertices, and we can click these one by one. Now it's a bit of a cumbersome tool at times. What it does is it allows you to click where you want a vertice and then press to the next one, and it will join the two. However, at times it does select other parts of it. Just right click off of the object. As you can sort of see there, it messes up from time to time. It's not your piece of software if you're getting this. It does it quite a lot. Now right click off into the distance, and it will enable you to get back to using the software. As you can see, bit cumbersome, shows you a few times, but when you get going, it's a really nice tool. And we can click these to make a full polygon, as you can sort of see there, and it will calculate it from the last polygon. But if you press move, you can actually move them to edit the formation in which they're in. Click back on to a polygon where you want to vertice where you want to go, and click to create a formation. I strongly suggest working in areas where we have a change of direction, like this branch first, so that you can run an edge around that point where it starts to change in direction, so that then you can extrude and them off in a separate direction to get the best result. It does take time. It's not something that is necessarily a tool I would use for every instance, but as we're making a unique object rather than one that is copied or a modular object, we're going to want to topologize this individually as opposed to sort of copying aspects of it. Now, whilst doing this, if you click off of the original poly, you'll need to click back on it, as I mentioned, with the right click. Just going to speed this up to sort of show how we go about using the tool and sort of moving it. Now, it means the move tool sort of allows us to be able to move them after they've been created, which is really good. Now, it doesn't mean that the actual topology is going to be perfect by the time you finished it. You may want to take it into another piece of software to clean it up. I most of the time use Max to do that, 3ds Max, and as you can see from the tutorial here, I'm just going around these edges and putting an edge or between these vertices, going around the bits that change in direction, because we're going to have different formations occurring throughout the object. Now, it is important to remember when we're topologizing this, we're trying to get the shape, so some of the topology will have to take the shape into consideration. If you have certain lines that you want in there or certain forms, you will need to make sure that they're a part of the drawing process that you're doing with these polygons. Now, if there is one of the verts that you don't like, hold Alt and click on the specific one, and then it will actually delete the edge or active point in which you've drawn onto here for the topology. Now if you ever save or click off, or it does a quick save, it will end up doing this. All you have to do, it's sort of showing the original, what the polys are going to look like. Now if you want to show the things back up, make sure that the object in the background is shown, and also you're going to want to go down to Topology and press Edit Topology again, and you'll be able to start doing your editing again as it was. Now it can be quite difficult at times to get the right shape. If we have a change in direction like the side, we're going to need to try and generate some thickness, but when you get to a point of that opening like this, it's helpful for us to try and draw a line through the opening so that we can change that direction. As you can sort of see here, we're going to need to make polys that are inside of that connection in a different sort of it going in a different direction. Now if we just do the one like you can see here, we'll get that sort of one thickness and it will be rather square in the actual finished model. If we put an additional edge through the center of those gaps, we will make sure that if we were to subdivide the object, we wouldn't get any of that sort of smoothing or bringing together of those edges. So I'm just going to speed up this process now and to a point of where hopefully we'll have almost a completely retopologized version of the Sculpting which we created. Now when we are finished, it's a good idea to press A, and also with that it allows us to see the finished project like we did earlier on. Because we're in a Z-sphere, if we have any openings, then we can go back in and edit until we're happy with the overall sort of final completion. Now it will take some time to edit this, and as I've mentioned earlier on, you may want to take it into another piece of software to finish it. When it comes to a point that you're happy with the overall object, what you're going to need to do is go down to adaptive skin, change the density to 1 because we want it at its lowest polygon amount. When we have that, we're then going to make it an adaptive skin, so it creates a new object. It's probably worth renaming it and saving it at this point as a subtool, and also saving your project. But also we're going to export the object file so that we can take it into another piece of software and do a little bit more editing. As you can see, active points at the moment around 7,000. I'm just going to show you what I would go about doing within 3ds Max. If you just import it into there, what you can do is you can delete the aspects of the groups that it imports that you don't need, and start to sort of edit this to a point of where you're extremely happy with it. Now, with very difficult objects like we've just had to sort of retopologize, you may get things sort of the edges that start to spiral, and I would suggest spending some time making sure that everything matches up. You might want to use sort of cuts or slight editing tools in your chosen piece of software just to make the topology a little bit neater than what it has been in Zbrush. Now you will need to spend some time in order to do this, but this is what comes with making unique objects, is the time allocation required to it. So just spend some time doing some mild adjustments. If you want to change the topology, you can. If not, just stick with what you've got in Zbrush. You can go back in Zbrush and do editing as well in order to get the best results possible. As I said, the method that I used in this Zsphere topology tool isn't the only one inside of Zbrush, but it's good for a starting point of view. Thanks very much for watching. Goodbye.